So if I can just say a bit about understanding their role, which is the first principle and probably the most important, because it actually encompasses all the others. And the starting point for this is that trustees must understand and accept their legal responsibilities. I don't want to go into this in too much detail, as I'm a lawyer. This is the session I usually give, but there's a lot of good advice on legal responsibilities. If you go to the Charity Commission website, the document on an effective trustee really sets out all the legal responsibilities, I think, very well. But trustees must all accept that they bear the ultimate responsibility for the way the organisation is directed and run in meeting its purposes. This is really the fundamental responsibility that all trustees must accept. And also that trustees have equal responsibility. You can't just leave things to the chair, and you can't leave finances to the treasurer, because at the end of the day, all trustees are equally responsible. And then under this, we cover the importance of the governing document, or the constitution, which every trustee must have a copy of it and actually refer to it on a regular basis. Trustees must act at all times in the best interest of the charity, and particularly in the best interest of their beneficiaries, and that may not always be the same. They must ensure solvency and the financial strength of the organisation, and they have to act reasonably in their decisions and in the leadership of the organisation. But in practice, I find a common problem in understanding the role is how to deal with role confusion. I do a lot of trustee training, and I always find I end up talking about hats, particularly different hats and changing hats. And this is because trustees often have more than one role, particularly in smaller organisations or startup organisations. They're often volunteers as well as trustees, and they need to be clear whether they're acting at any stage as a trustee or a volunteer, because decision making and responsibility as a trustee is a collective one. And so when they're actually volunteering, the role changes and they no longer have that authority. There's quite a well-known Canadian charity governance expert, John Carver, who was very popular a few years ago. And he says about trustees, when we speak as individuals, the staff need not take notice. But when we speak as a board, it is as if God has spoken. And I think this is true, that trustees need to realise when they're just acting as a volunteer in the organisation, they've stepped out of their board role and they're in a different situation, and this can lead to role confusion. Another area where you can have role confusion is, and again it's a common one, is where a trustee is also a user. I mean, some of you might not know that up until about 20 years ago, the Charity Commission didn't allow users to be trustees. Because they thought that there was an inherent conflict of interest which was too great, and they received a benefit from the charity. I think everyone today would accept the value of users as trustees, but there are some situations where the trustee needs to be clear what hat they're wearing, whether they're acting as a trustee or a user, and sometimes there is a conflict of interest. For example, when they have to look at raising service fees, which is going to affect some of them wearing different hats. And similar issues also arise where a trustee is also a member, very common situation, but there is potentially a conflict here and a role confusion. But possibly the most difficult case of role confusion is where you have what are sometimes called representative trustees, where a trustee is being elected or appointed by a funder or an outside body or possibly a local branch or part of the membership or users, they often see their role as representing the interests of the body or the people who elected or appointed them. But it's absolutely clear under charity law that their duty is to act in the best interest of the charity. And again, it can be a difficult situation, and it's a conflict that needs to be managed, and they need to be clear at any stage what hat they're wearing. Another issue which comes under the principle of understanding the role is the need to address the board-staff relationship and the governance-management divide. I think the delineation between governance and management is never straightforward, and no governance framework or ever really addresses it completely. And ultimately, it's going to be a matter of mutual trust and respect between the board and the staff, and the chair and the CEO relationship is really key in this. And there needs to be a balance between this. I mean, on one hand, you can have a relationship that can be too cozy, and on the other hand, you can have a relationship that can be too confrontational. And I think I've seen both at various times and in various charities. In the code, we actually say that you should try to ensure that the relationship between the board and the chief executive retains an appropriate balance of support, scrutiny, and challenge. We also say that the board should avoid inappropriate involvement in operational matters, but take responsibility for challenging and holding to account senior management. So it's really all about constructive challenge and the board being the critical friend. Not something that's always easy to achieve, but I think something to aim for. If I can turn from the first principle to the third principle, working effectively both as individuals and as a team, and say something about trustee recruitment. Again, this is very much one of the people issues, which is shown in every report on governance to be absolutely crucial, because governance is only as good as the trustees. And I think time spent on trustee recruitment is always going to be time well spent. And the starting point here will usually be a skills audit of the current board, identifying the skills required, the gaps, and how you're going to fill those gaps. And also, when rewriting the code, we stress the need for diversity of the board. This was something that hadn't really been explored so much in the first edition. And when we talked about diversity, we really meant diversity in the very widest sense, not just the usual age, gender, ethnicity, but also background, experience, even personality. It's quite useful if you have different personalities on a board, because they're going to approach things in different ways. They're going to ask different questions. And in fact, we saw diversity, I mean, sometimes it's just seen as a matter of political correctness, but we actually see it as part of risk management. Because if you have a diverse board, they're going to ask more challenging questions. They're going to come at from different viewpoints. And they're going to avoid groupthink. And again, there has been research on corporate boards, which shows that a diverse board actually does help in risk management. And there's some interesting research from Harvard Business School, which again is on corporate governance, but I think the principle is the same. And this is about women on boards. And it actually shows that companies with women on boards are more successful and more profitable. And I think this actually applies just as much to diversity in all its senses. And this is actually going to lead to a more effective and a more successful charity. I think an interesting question when we look at diversity is the relationship between diversity and the need for cohesion. I said that the recent research showed that the key driver for effective boards was strong teamwork. And so for that, the board needs to act as a team. And so how do you actually build a diverse board into a strong team? I'm the chair of an international human rights organization based in Washington. We work in 90 countries all around the world, and we have a small board, but it comes from, I think, every continent, and we only meet face-to-face twice a year. It's essential that we act as a team, and we have a strong team, but we all speak different languages, we have come from totally different cultures, and yet it is a very strong board, and in the States, we are noted as being an organisation with very strong governance. And we've actually earlier this year won a $1 million award for innovation and effectiveness. And in fact, so when we actually draw up what we call the board profile or the trustee description, we have something, we're looking for candidates who have high potential to share camaraderie and cohesion with other board members. So we're looking for people who are actually going to work together as a team. And I think one way to build this is to do things together outside the board meetings. Away days, board dinners, all of that can be quite useful. My international board, in fact, in 2 weeks' time, I'm chairing the next board meeting in Amman in Jordan. And so before that, most of the members of the board are going for a trip to Petra. So that's quite a nice, I will add that we're all paying for it ourselves. This isn't an undue benefit. But I shall be going there with a Macedonian judge and a Venezuelan human rights activist and a US attorney, amongst others. But it's all very good team building exercise.